This is Designing for Equity, where we give firm leaders smart, real-world strategies to build inclusive cultures, advance women in the profession, and make work fair for everyone. Hi, this is Katherine Porter. Today, my guest is Julie Kratz, author of the brand new book, We Want You, Allyship Guide for People with Power. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I really enjoyed reading your book, and there were so many great points and great nuggets. I can't wait to dive in. But first, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about you and your background, and also what prompted you to write this book. I know this is, I think, your fourth book, so I'm curious about what led you to do this piece in particular.
Yeah, well, I started my career in corporate America, where a lot of people do, and I was raised by a strong single mom, feminist. She's like, oh, wait, the feminists solved all the problems. This is back in the early 2000s when she said, everything's equal. And, you enter the workplace and you're like, look around. I don't see any women in leadership. I'm the only woman on a leadership development program. What happened? Why would she lie about this? So 12 years later, I just kept feeling this elusive sense of exclusion, and you didn't feel a sense of belonging, and it was really hard Monday mornings to stomach going to work. And so that's when I started my own business. My daughter was just a year old, and I was a primary breadwinner, so there was never a good time to kind of make these pivots. But when you kind of get forced into a pivot point, you find your way through it. And 10 years later, I'm now writing a lot. I'm researching still a lot about allyship and how to be supportive of other people. Not just in the workplace, but in all phases of your lives. And what compelled me to write this book about people with power is really just over the last year, seeing people's perceptions around, DEI backlash and not understanding their role in it. And so I just got really curious, spent 50 hours interviewing people, cited 60 different secondary research studies in the book. And it was really through the lens of, I wanted to understand what it would take to engage dominant group members in a conversation that they were always meant to be included in, but somehow didn't feel included in. And what I found is they needed a real clear invitation. And so the title is playful. Uncle Sam probably conjures up in your mind for We Want You. And we have a mosaic image on the cover, so it's not the traditional Uncle Sam, but it really is an invitation. We want you in this conversation seriously, and here are some steps you might consider if you want to join.
Yeah, I think that's really great, because I know for me, I sometimes feel there's places where I can be an ally, but I'm kind of scared. You talk about fear as being a barrier to allyship, and I think it's partly I'm afraid of doing it wrong. And I'm afraid of not being corrected with grace. I've been told, oh, well, your intentions don't matter. It's the feelings that you're invoking. And it's well, but my intentions should count for something, right? I'm trying. So how do you address fear and how to overcome that?
Yeah. Well, Katherine, you're making a good point about intentions versus impact. That's one of the frameworks that I think is really helpful in a subchapter of the book is you can have good intentions and also have a negative impact. So it's less about the intentions you had and more about the impact you created. And if you can kind of separate those two, I think allies can find their way into the work of oh my gosh, I thought I was being helpful by saying that. But instead, the perception didn't match my intention. And so I need to work on that next time and learn from it. And that's what allyship's all about, is the fumble and stumble. But the fear factor is very real. That was the number one finding I found in the book, was that we made the assumption with a lot of DEI books and even allyship books that I've written, oh, you're all in, you get it. You want to be part of this. I'll just tell you what to do. People aren't there yet. They don't have necessarily mapped a strong personal why to the work. Things like status threat, fear of irrelevance, all risk, no reward. I have something to lose, nothing to gain. Those are all kind of fears that are playing in the background, especially people with power, because the more power you have, the more you have to lose. But we know power shared grows power. Power holding it to ourselves doesn't actually help it grow. The best way to grow your power is to share it with others.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that backs that up in lots of different contexts, and certainly in allyship and diversity and equity and inclusion work in general, but also just in performance and teamwork and the business metrics that are somewhat separate from the DEI work that you're talking about. There's something in there that caught my eye at the beginning of the book. We're talking about decentering. And at first I didn't really understand what that was and what that meant. And so could you explain a little bit about what that means? And I think it relates directly to that intentions versus impact piece as well.
Yeah, well, we can do that when we get caught in a mistake. We can center ourselves in the narrative, and it's like, woe is me. Oh my gosh, I didn't mean it that way. Let me apologize. So 5,000 different times, but all I'm doing is making it more about me instead of the person that was affected. So centering is making ourselves center in the story instead of centering historically marginalized groups or people that were harmed or people that were excluded. So it kind of reinforces dominance when we continue to recenter ourselves. And, I shared a vulnerable story in the book about myself. I've made this mistake too. We're kind of ego-driven humans. We're selfish creatures because if we're not surviving, we can't really help others. So it's not entirely uncommon for people to center themselves, even myself knowing better than that. And I remember posting problematic image that I hadn't really thought that much about before I posted it, and just got like a tremendous backlash from my LinkedIn community and people that I'd known and like been on their podcasts and things. And so I was just totally thrown off guard. And instead of owning it, I got defensive, I got combative, and all that did was make it worse. And so a week later, I had to repost with an apology and an accountability and decenter myself with that language. And it was costly. It cost me a client. It cost me a lot of brand equity. And if I had just taken a deep breath, decentered myself and owned it and apologized at the beginning, I could have avoided, a week of sleepless nights and stress.
Yeah, but it's so easy in the moment because you do feel like how did this happen? You took this other way, and it's hard to take that breath and not be defensive. And I had a moment at a conference with one of my co-speakers, co-presenters, and we were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it was after we'd spoken, and I said something about meritocracy, higher on merit sounds good, but we're not there yet. And she just bristled, and she's like, "What do you mean? We're not there yet?" Oh, I didn't mean it that way. What I meant was that your merit as a Black woman is measured differently than my merit as a white woman. And fortunately I was able to explain it and articulate it in the moment. But, it was hard to not just be like, well, that's not what I meant. I was like, why is she mad at me? Or why is she bristling? But so much of this work calls us out on those instincts and those gut reactions that we just make that are linked to survival. It's like affinity bias, right? Because affinity bias is a survival mode. So I feel like that decentering piece, it relates to the fear and the intentions, but I know you also talk about it in terms of the actions that you take and how the decentering types of actions you can take. Can you give us a few examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, it's interesting. People always want to jump to the action part. Like, okay, what do I do? Just tell me what to do. So it's not a check the box. It's not a one and done. It's really not a prescriptive approach. It's a choose your own adventure approach. Yeah. And so the first few exercises that I have in the book is unpacking your fears and talking about using your fear for fuel. Fear is actually an incredible motivator. If you flip the script and you're not afraid of it, you embrace it and harness it and use it for good. So is power shared, right? How to leverage your unique sources of power. And, what's the why? What's the benefit for you? So that's more introspective activity, but that's really important that you do that work first before you outwardly show up. Because if you don't do that introspective work, you're going to fall into those traps of centering, if your intention's not matching your impact, of not knowing your audience, of not being intentional and consistent with your actions as effective allies are. So then, I really think about the most actionable piece of the book. In chapter 4, we talk about know your ally role, which is one of our most popular workshops, has been for years. Really helping people understand what role do you want to play. And I use an umbrella framework. We talk about mentorship, sponsorship, advocacy, coaching, and challenging. No one's going to be all of those things to all people. You just don't have enough bandwidth, time, skill set. I pick one or two spokes. Okay, I'm going to be a mentor to somebody different than me. I'm going to seek out somebody that's a challenger that can challenge me that's different than me. See what happens. And just go with the flow. Try it out. Continue to show up. figure out what works, what doesn't, rinse, repeat, tweak, modify over time. And then it becomes like once you start, just like when you go to the gym, right? The first few times you lift the weights, it hurts. But once you put in the reps with the allyship, it gets easier. It's easier to make those lifts, but you need to start with some small wins first. I found, especially having done this work well before 2020 when, this industry exploded, everyone wanted to jump in the deep end. Like, oh, Julie, let's do an anti-racism workshop series. Like, really? And I had trouble believing them back then. Like, why? Why are we doing this? Like, maybe we should try the baby pool first, where we talk about differences and identities and biases and, some of these like more gradual topics. And that's what we've learned from a lot of this backlash is we need to go back to the basics. People weren't ready. They thought they were, and they clearly were not. And really meet people where they're at in this moment, especially those with power. Because I constantly find in my workshops that the dominant group members are not showing up. They either think it's not for them, that it's not work that they should be doing, that they're going to be shamed and blamed when they show up, all these fears, right? And so going back to the basics and helping people understand this has a real impact on our business. Here are some things that we could do to achieve A, B, and C outcomes. Do you want these outcomes? And here's some things that we can do. And we need everyone a part of this conversation, not just historically marginalized groups.
Yeah, that's important. And I think one other piece that people in power often see, we all like to say, well, I don't see differences, or I'm not biased, or, and it's kind of that intention. Like I see women all the same. I mean, I remember being on a call and we were talking about intersectionality and diversity, and it was in the project management group. How does that impact how you handle your project? One of the guys, white male, older, and he was like, well, I just don't see differences. Yeah, I treat everybody the same. And it's like, really? And I think that's a common barrier in some ways. People think, I don't need to learn about how to be, inclusive. I already treat everyone the same. If that's true, we'd all be a lot further along, right?
Yeah, it's very common that like, oh, I would never treat someone differently based on the color of their skin. And I think most of us think that, right? Yeah. But then the question I would ask is like, oh, really? Tell me about your friends of color. Tell me about how much time you spend in communities that are different from you from a racial perspective. And then the answers get really tricky, right? Because 75% of white people live in white-dominated communities.
Yeah.
And so the reality and the perception aren't quite matching up. Most white people only have one friend of color, if that. And so we have, like you said, like B networks. And that made sense, thousands of years ago for primitive survival in a global world where we're working with people from all corners of the planet. Not so helpful. We're just going to learn more from people different from us. So yes, and there's probably a disjointed way there. So I think these conversations are hard though, because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. You don't want them to get them to bristle, like you said, or get defensive. And so I usually just lead with curiosity, not to like get people, but like, and tell me more about your network. I'm curious who you spend time with. One phrase I like to use a lot is like, I used to think that too. And here's what I came to understand. So you can be a little vulnerable and elicit some empathy from somebody else to meet you where you're at. And then really just listen to learn. I have frequently people come up to me after my speaking engagements and say, yeah, Julie, that was really great what you did, but I treat everyone the same. It's like, oh, really? So like if you were with a kid or someone of a significant different age, would you treat them the same? Like we don't treat people the same. Like we modify our behavior innately and intuitively, subconsciously. We're not even aware of it. And that sadly hits all the different identities and lived experiences. The more someone's different from you, the more you're likely to treat them differently.
Yeah. It's today's kind of volatile world. It's being normalized to do that and accepted. And so I think that's just yet another challenge to allyship and equity work right now.
It's called othering. So I really love, it represents the book. The UC Berkeley has wonderful resources from their Othering and Belonging Institute. And when we other people, and this is being done in live mainstream right now, they're the other, they're the illegal, they're the fill in the blank. It's a gateway to dehumanization. Like when we start othering people, we limit their humanity, and then that can create and invite episodes of violence. And we're seeing this on main stage right now, sadly.
It's really scary to see that happening. One of the things that I think your kids are a little younger than mine, but mine, they're, I guess, Gen Z, but I've noticed a little bit that they have a hard time with assuming positive intent, and or like Brene Brown talks about that. Like, what happens if you just assume everyone's actually doing the best they can? And I think that's just really challenging, I think, for people of color, and also just maybe it's a generational thing, but how do you address that without putting the burden on those folks to provide that feedback and that guidance?
Oh, I know. Yeah, and it's so unfair to have people that are being adversely affected have to also manage the cleanup process. That is just so unfair. And so one of the things as allies is do your research, do your homework, Don't expect people to educate you about your own biases, your own limitations, or things that are Googleable. Do your work. And then what you're talking about with Gen Z is really interesting too. And this is a huge why for allyship, is the workforce is shifting very rapidly. Baby boomer retirement rates are at their peak. They will continue to retire for the next few years, eventually. And then Gen Z entering the workforce, their background is rooted in the height of immigration, of social justice movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And they're just going to have more power than previous generations because labor shortages are going to be pretty severe. Birth rates are down. We're not replacing the population as quickly as we were even 20 years ago. And so all of these kind of macro trends coming together. And Gen Z is unwavering with diversity and inclusion. 83% of them use it as a screener for even applying for a job. So put all these things together, and if an organization isn't thinking ahead for that scenario, that's, by the way, not that far away, like we're talking 2030, then you're going to be painfully behind and playing catch up, or maybe be completely irrelevant to the consumers and employees you hope to garner. And so there's really no choice, the way I see it, is by being proactive now and doing the right thing now to lead inclusively so that you maintain your relevance for the future.
I think that's so important. It's definitely a business strategy. I mean, I know we shouldn't have to rationalize it in the economics of it, but it's just the right thing to do. But on the other hand, that's what speaks to a lot of people. It's something we should all aspire to doing.
Business case. It's a
yeah. So they go hand in hand there, and that's just a reality. And then, but you're talking about, it's not just a business; it's survival. It's just adapting to the society that's the future. But it's just a matter of meeting the needs of the future. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I think business leaders really need to realize that so they can feel comfortable and advocate for this work, which is so important.
Yep.
So in the book, each chapter you have some reflection questions. You're really trying to get people to reflect on their own and learn about themselves. I assume that was intentional based on what you've seen work for this type of change.
Yeah, thinking about the shifts that really need to happen. I think the biggest shift, and this kind of speaks to what you're talking about with the business case and the human case, like something that organizations can absolutely measure as a function of inclusion is psychological safety. So psychological safety, we know from the research that when psychological safety is present, meaning people can it's safe for interpersonal risk-taking in an organization. I can challenge things, I can give feedback, conflict's okay, healthy conflict. When it's paired with perspective-taking, meaning I'm curious to hear your perspective, not judge your perspective. When those two things come together, there's profound impacts to an organization. Problem is, very few organizations have high psychological safety, let alone perspective-taking with it. So I would start with psychological safety first to set the foundation. And it's not a light switch event, right? It's not, I did a psych safety training program and we're good now. It's more like everyday behaviors that get manifested, modeled, and rewarded. And one thing that's my clients do that are really dedicated to this work is they have a question and their pulse surveys, employee engagement surveys, where they garner employee data about psychological safety. And they measure over time to see if it's improving or perhaps even sliding back. And it's questions like, I feel comfortable speaking truth to power. I feel safe expressing a different opinion that might challenge the status quo. And if you really think about these types of questions, very few organizations have high responses to those. And this is highly correlated with retention, with innovation, revenue, profits, all these business metrics. But at the end of the day, don't we deserve to work in a place where we feel mentally safe to be and exist? I would not want to stay in an organization where I don't feel those things, but it's just me.
I know, me too. Well, and when I think about my early career at my law firm, and I came in and I was like, oh, I want to start a family. And I just have all these doubts. And I made the quote mistake of sharing those doubts with my mentors. And I paid the price later on. And I talked to a friend of mine, and he was like, I can't believe you said that years later. It's like, well, I didn't know. I didn't know I could say that.
You were psychologically safe and you weren't.
Right, exactly. I should have been able to say that. Now I look back and I think, what I really needed was someone to say, yes, you can do this. Let's figure out how you can both, set yourself up for success at the firm and show up for your family the way you want, and instead I ended up leaving the firm. They lost a huge investment, and that's just my story.
And to hire somebody and retrain somebody at the firm.
Yeah. I was with that firm for 17 years.
Yeah, that's a huge loss. That's like hundreds of thousands of dollars that they lost.
Yeah.
And that's what organizations, I think, if there's any compelling reason to rejoin this conversation or recommit, is that kind of stuff's going to keep happening. And are you okay with that human capital loss? I mean, if you are, okay.
Yeah.
It is costing you.
Right. I mean, if I'd been smarter, I would have left earlier. But I was so optimistic. I have rose-colored glasses, and I'm an optimist, and all that good stuff.
And I think that was common a previous generation, and certainly Gen Xers.
That's me, yeah.
Certainly millennials like myself. We're like, I went into the workplace thinking it would be one way, and it was another, right?
Yeah.
Like my mom said.
Yeah.
It's not what I experienced. And it's like, okay, well, I guess you just have to tough it out. And then after 4 exhausting years, each job was like 4-year cycle. It's like, all right, I'm exhausted again. And then you think it's you. I'm.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely.
Internalize it. Women, people of color, folks with disabilities, all these differences, you think it's you. And then when you realize that it's a collective experience with other people, you're like, oh, okay, cool. It's like gaslighting.
I know when I read that in your book, that friend you talked about that gaslighting, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and then of course blaming myself and thinking the problem was me and the mistakes I made and things like that. And now I look back and I'm like, no, it wasn't. And of course, this firm makes lists of best places to work for women, and I'm like, that was not my experience. Theoretically, in some ways, they were very supportive, but when push came to shove, I just couldn't advance, and so that was, super frustrating. And I think that laws, especially male-dominated and tradition-bound, there's definitely the attitude of, well, I had to deal with this. I had to bill 2,000 hours and work nights and weekends and whatnot, so why should you have it any easier? And I think you address that kind of argument in your book.
Yeah. I was watching all things like Netflix show about Prince Harry, and I don't know why I got sucked into that a few years ago, but
brain candy, that's what I call it.
We just can't help it. There's something naturally interesting about royalty or famous people. But anyway, there's a part of it where Prince Harry confronts his dad, the king, and says, this isn't fair. I won't be treated this way. The press is, violent, scary. They don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And his dad says, well, I had it hard. You just have to learn to deal with it. And he's like, if you had it hard, why would you want that for me? And I just thought that was a really important distinction. If you did have it hard, if you know how painful it is, why the heck would you want that for somebody else?
Yeah.
But there's this well, I had to do it, you have to do it too. And I can see how that's a hard thing to resist. But pain, you felt pain. And rather than dealing with that pain, plowed through it somehow, and I would argue probably haven't dealt with it, but now it's being projected on other people. And that's really like the root of a toxic culture where those behaviors are referenced, they're modeled, they're replicated. Our behavior is contagious.
Yeah.
We're social species. So if you want different behavior, model different behavior.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, at least in law firms in particular, it's the that's just paying your dues. The long hours and giving up your whole life. That's just paying your dues. And I get that there are experiences. I talked about that with one of my daughters who wants to go to medical school and she wants to do a certain kind of medicine. And I'm like, okay, but you understand you're going to you quote, pay your dues and do your rotations. And to me, that's different because that's just getting trained and it's part of the being in the.
And it's for every doctor. Like,
yeah,
exactly.
Across
the board part of your training.
And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they still do. We always hear like the crazy hours, internships and residence work. Like, does that really have to be the case? But the rotations and the experiences in general, yeah, I get that. But that's paying your dues. But I think there's a point where that goes too far.
Yeah. And just because it's always been that way, does it have to be that way?
Yeah.
We just don't think about the structures. The water we're swimming in is just the water. We don't see the water anymore because it's just so ingrained in us and normalized. And so what I love about people that are different is they rethink these outdated systems and processes. And we know when we make the workplace work better for some, we make it work better for all. Yeah. There's countless examples. I really love inclusive design right now. And this is actually a growth area in DEI right now because of the aging population and disabilities. When 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, neurodivergence at its highest rate ever because of awareness and tools now. And so making things more inclusive, there's countless examples of innovations that have happened, benefits that have happened. And we used to call it the curb cut effect, where you cut curbs, with ADA, we had to cut curbs for wheelchair users. Well, who else benefits? I ride a bike, I push a stroller.
Yeah, exactly.
Do, right? And so many more people do benefit from it, not just wheelchair users. And that's actually what happens with nearly all acts of inclusion. It works better for me, but it also works better for you. This is it's not a finite game, it's an infinite game.
Well, it's like psychological safety, right? If it's psychologically safe for me, it's also psychologically safe for everybody else. And that's where the power comes from, and the huge, it has such a huge impact because that is the case.
Absolutely.
When we dive up and we say, okay, well, it's safe for you to talk, but not you. Don't bring that up. Like my friend telling me, oh, you shouldn't have said that. It's like, well, I can't say that, then it's not safe for anyone.
And I already said it.
But it's not.
It's really helpful after the fact to tell somebody that, because you already said it. You can't take it back.
Right. I mean, and this was like years later too. I related to so many of the stories in the book and that learning as we go kind of thing. I was talking to my daughter about her girlfriend, and she's a trans woman, and my daughter used a term I hadn't heard before. She talked about how her girlfriend's mom used her dead name, and I was like, oh, what's a dead name? And she told me, and then I was like, oh, so what's her dead name? Like, just out of curiosity. And my daughter was just like appalled.
There's a reason we call it dead name yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was just completely curious. I'd never heard the term, and I would think that maybe I was safe having that conversation with my daughter versus maybe, like, I probably would not have asked that later.
Right. But it's a point of curiosity, and there's a balancing act with curiosity. Like, you were just curious and wanted to know what their name was before.
I'm just nosy.
But for somebody that went through all that work of that transition to let go of that name, now you're taking me back to the place of the person I'm not anymore. Yeah. So it's a both and. I think the transgender community is one that is just fascinating to watch. A lot of harm happening right now. But when you think about the most marginalized people, when we center them, back to centering, when we center them in the narrative, we can solve the deepest problems. And when I think about who's suffering the most right now, and it's not a suffering competition by any means, but trans folks are really, really getting hit hard right now. And so if we center their needs in the narrative, again, curb cut effect will make it better for everybody. Pronouns. why is it such a big deal to share pronouns? Like, I don't understand what this is costing you.
Exactly.
When I explain it as, well, I'm sharing my pronouns, when people are like, it's obvious what your pronouns are. Like, is it? Like, okay, cool. But like,
So
why is it a big deal? And then what I'm doing is taking that burden, to what you
Yeah.
said earlier, burden off of people that are microaggressed, that are misgendered. They don't have to do all the work. I'm doing some of the work with them.
yeah, that was the thing throughout working with people, and that's such a powerful thing. And like one thing too is that the how can I support, or what can I do to help you, and having that
What does support
conversation.
look like for you?
What does support look like for you? And I love that, because that's like a real question I can remember and I can ask, and I can remember to ask, and it automatically puts them in the center, right? And a friend of mine, she wrote a piece about name pronunciations, and she has a non-traditional name, and and she's talking about her story about how people just want to shorten it and call her something easier, and she was like, just ask me how to pronounce it. And I was always too afraid to ask. Like, I should already know,
Right.
and now since I'm reading that, I'm like, now I'm like totally comfortable asking people. So,
Well, there is a window with name pronunciations, because after time has passed, then it's really awkward, right? Like, then you should know. So I always just try right from the get-go. If I read
yeah,
someone's name, can't Google it and figure out how to spell it. Like, usually you can Google it and it'll phonetically do it for you. And LinkedIn has a feature, but like, I try to just stop myself. I try first and like, teach me how to say it if I said it wrong.
yeah.
Right. And so it, again, is not putting all the work on them. Like, oh, your name, how do you even say it? Like, how do you
I'm like,
say that?
that's
Or
kind
then,
of hard. Can we just call you this instead?
yeah, we rename people. And it's like, oh my gosh, if someone just started calling me like, only like two
Jules.
people in my life call me Jules, right?
Yeah.
If a client started calling me that because my name was hard, I'd be like, offended
Yeah.
and creeped out.
Yeah, and that's a name privilege we have. And one of my daughters has a kind of unusual name, and it's like a normal name, but then it has an A at the front. And when my neighbors, we would always, the kids were all the same ages, they would play, and they would call her, they would drop the A. They just didn't hear. Do I say something or not? And I'm like, yeah, I better say something, because, in 25 years, when they get invited to her wedding and realize they've been calling her the wrong name, they're going to want to know. And try not to get too hung up on people calling me in a different context. Like, if the person at Starbucks spells my name with a C, I'm just not going to care. Yeah.
Yeah, I made this mistake. My doctor is spelled Farrah, and I called her Farah for years. And then one day she was telling me a story about how many of her clients don't pronounce her name correctly. And I was like, really? What would they say? And she's like, Farah. I was like, oh, shoot. I was like, I say that. She's like, oh, it's Farah. I was like, so then the whole time I'm meeting with her, I'm just thinking about how much I've been mispronouncing her name.
Yeah.
And at the end, then I centered myself and I was like, I'm just so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been mispronouncing your name. And she's like, Julie, have you been thinking about this whole conversation? She's like, that's silly. I wasn't talking about you, but yes, that's how to say my name. So then two of the people I referred to her, I let them know immediately afterwards that her name is pronounced this way. So that
well, that's a name I wouldn't necessarily think to ask, too, right? We think we know, right?
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing about allyship, is sometimes we don't even know what we should be looking for or thinking about.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are just ingrained in us, and we will absolutely make mistakes. We will bumble and stumble. That's just part of the journey, is being open to it as learning experiences. And, when I learn, I grow.
Yeah.
You don't get on a bike and ride it the first time. You fall a bunch of times.
Oh,
It's just how it goes.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation. I just want to ask one more question. So what's one strategic move leaders could make now to start embedding allyship in the workplace?
Yeah, I would say, back to what I said earlier about psychological safety, whatever words you're using to describe your culture, and go back to your cultural values. Most companies have, 3 to 5 cultural values, and things like trust, things like innovation, things like inclusion, hopefully our big respect are baked into some of those values. I would think about, how can I create a workplace that works better for everybody by tapping into those values and living those values more. And so psychological safety, allyship, inclusion, like all of these concepts can help you achieve the values that you've already decided to live by. This isn't a bolt on. It's not a extra thing to do. It's not a new thing. It's actually based on who we've always aspired to be. And most companies, if you look at their values and their actions, there's some alignment, but there's a lot of misalignment there, a lot of opportunities to grow. And so if you want to live up to the expectations you've set, dive in, start measuring these things, start talking about them. And the more we talk, model, learn, it becomes just contagious. It's like that flywheel effect. It just spreads.
Thank you for being on the show. I encourage everyone to check out Julie's book coming out on International Allyship Day. So thanks again for being here. Do you have any, share your contact information or how folks can follow up with you?
Yeah, it's super easy on nextpivotpoint.com. So I've got book discussion guides that you can download for free training videos, just some really great resources that are completely complimentary. So nextpivotpoint.com is the easiest place to find me.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Thanks for listening to Designing for Equity. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with a friend or colleague. You can also sign up for my newsletter for more tools and insights at theresourcefullawyer.com. On LinkedIn, be sure to connect with me there too. And thanks for joining me in pursuit of equity.